What most people call reality is filtered ever so thoroughly through habit and language. That is why it becomes almost impossible to notice how strange it actually is. We grow up learning to name things, sort experiences, assign causes, and build explanations until the world feels unquestionable. But beneath this familiar surface, there is a somewhat weird absurdity. Everything we take to be constant is in fact in motion, and what we assume to be separate depends on everything else. The one who claims ownership of experience cannot be found in the way we expect. This is something so ordinary that it escapes attention precisely because it is always present. Consider how naturally we say "I am here" or "I am aware." Hidden inside of these phrases is an assumption that awareness belongs to a particular individual, that it is produced by a body, owned by a person, and located somewhere behind the eyes. We rarely question this because it fits neatly with the way society trains us to think. We are taught to regard ourselves as objects among other objects, each with a private inner life sealed off from the rest of the world. From this angle, consciousness seems like a personal possession, a kind of mental property. Yet, if you look carefully, this picture starts to shake. Awareness itself does not announce a name or a biography. Those details appear differently, all of which come and go. The sense of being someone feels continuous only because memory strings together fragments and labels the sequence me. But memory is something noticed, not the one who notices. Thoughts comment on experience, but they are not the field in which experience appears. Feelings color the moment, but they do not stand apart from the noticing of them. When these elements are observed rather than assumed to be the observer, the feeling of that guy who is working the levers of our body machine begins to loosen. This loosening happens the moment you stop insisting that awareness must be something in particular. Awareness does not need to be improved or even purified. Why? Because it is already open enough to include confusion, clarity, boredom, excitement, and silence alike. The problem is that awareness has been assigned a job it never had, which is it being an object with boundaries. Language contributes heavily to this misunderstanding. Grammar forces experience into subject and object, as if there must always be a doer separate from what is done, or a thinker separate from thought. But this is a convenience of speech, nothing more, nothing less. The world isn't assembled out of independent pieces that later interact. It is a continuous event, a single movement appearing as countless forms. To divide it up is useful when we're charting a course through it, but misleading when taken as literal. Looking at it like that makes it seem like the idea of a personal center of consciousness is fiction. It helps living organisms to coordinate their behavior, but it does not point to an actual entity sitting inside the head. The sense of "I am" arises naturally, but it refers to the fact of being aware prior to any description. When this fact is mistaken for an object, all sorts of complications, like for example anxiety, appear, because an imagined object can be threatened. When an imagined object feels incomplete, desire for change follows. Fear of loss dominates, because an imagined object must eventually disappear. Awareness itself, however, has no such problems. It does not need reassurances, and it also does not worry about survival. These concerns belong to the image of a separate individual after all, nothing more than an image constructed from memory and expectation. Experience doesn't break apart into nothingness when attention relaxes its grip on that image. Why would it? On the contrary, it becomes simpler and more direct. Sounds are just sounds. Colors are just colors. thoughts pass without the burden of ownership. This simplicity removes the familiar sense of control which might feel somewhat scary at first. The mind will protest by demanding the usual explanations and guarantees. It wants to know specifically what awareness is, where it came from, and what it is for. But awareness, on the other hand, does not answer these questions because it operates outside of them. It is the condition in which histories and functions appear. Trying to grasp it conceptually is like trying to bite your own teeth. This is why discussions about ultimate causes tend to go in circles. When the mind looks for a source, it expects to find something standing behind experience, pushing it forward like a machine. But whatever the mind finds is another appearance within experience, just another object noticed. The noticing itself cannot be turned into an object without contradiction. The moment you try to point to it, you are already using it. In this sense, awareness is closer than any explanation, yet farther than any description. The ordinary reaction to this is frustration. People assume that if something cannot be pinned down explicitly, it must be vague or useless. But the opposite is the case. What cannot be pinned down is precisely what allows everything else to appear. Space cannot be seen as an object, yet without it there would be no room for anything. In the same way, awareness does not present itself as a particular experience, yet without it no experience would be known. This brings us to the curious fact that awareness does not stand apart from the world. It isn't watching life from a distance. The feeling of separation appears only when thought draws a line and declares one side to be me and the other to be not me. But this line is just a concept. In direct experience, there is simply being. Questions about whether there is one consciousness or many are less pressing, because the distinction assumes separate containers in the first place. From the standpoint of experience, there are many perspectives, but not many awarenesses. Just as many windows can face the same sky without dividing the sky, countless viewpoints can exist without fragmenting what knows them. The same applies to the idea of a supreme reality standing apart from the everyday world. If such a reality were truly separate, it would have to be known as an object, which would place it inside experience rather than at its root. If it really was fundamental, it would not be hidden behind appearances, but instead appear as them. Nothing needs to descend into the world or withdraw from it. The world is the display. This does not mean that everything is equally meaningful or that distinctions disappear in daily life. Practical differences remain. You still step out of the way of traffic and rest when tired. The change is not in behavior but in the sense of burden behind it. Action happens without any extra weight attached to it. In other words, life continues, but it feels less like a personal project. Seen this way, freedom is what remains when the assumption of a separate center relaxes. There is no prize at the end, no final certificate. There is simply the recognition that what you have been trying to become was never absent. The effort to secure it was part of the misunderstanding. So you see, this doesn't require withdrawal from the world or rejection of desire. Desires will show up all the time, but they are no longer treated as commands issued by a central authority. They are simply experiences, rising and falling. Some are acted upon, others are not. None define what you are. When the compulsion to satisfy them disappears, a great deal of mental noise settles on its own. Awareness is not dramatic, which is why it has no need to announce itself with fireworks. It is quietly present in every ordinary moment, in the most unremarkable situations. The difficulty has never been finding it, but overlooking it in favor of stories about ourselves. When those stories loosen, even briefly, there is a sense of ease that does not depend on circumstances. It isn't excitement or withdrawal, but a simple clarity. This clarity appears when belief itself is seen as an activity within awareness rather than a description of reality. Opinions come and go, explanations are revised, but the open field in which they occur does not take sides. It doesn't argue with the mind or try to correct it. Instead, it allows confusion as readily as understanding. What follows from this is a different quality of engagement. When the world is no longer treated as a problem to be solved by a separate self, responses become more direct. Compassion arises without calculation, not as a moral duty but as a natural resonance. When there is no rigid boundary between oneself and others, concern for others does not feel like self-sacrifice. All of this may sound like abstract gobbledygook until you notice it in your own immediate experience. That comes from a pause in effort. It happens when attention stops trying to fix itself and simply rests as what is already working. There is nothing exotic about this. It is closer than breath, yet it does not belong to anyone. This is not a conclusion, because nothing has been wrapped up. It is, however, an opening, a way of seeing that remains available in the middle of ordinary life. The invitation is not to adopt a new identity or worldview, but to notice what has been operating all along, prior to any view at all. So, did any of the things said here resonate? Did they feel like they were true for you? Then you might feel like looking a little further into it. For that purpose, we have put together a digital retreat that is built to bring you into direct contact with the clarity that's here and has been here your entire life. Through carefully designed meditations, teachings, and simple pointers that remove the unnecessary effort around this whole subject, you will find what's real and what isn't. If that sounds like something worth exploring, you'll find the link in the description. And if you prefer to listen to our videos with or without music, you can find them on Patreon.